Arman was never an ordinary person. From a very young age, he had been fascinated by the stars. While other children played outside, he spent hours lying on the roof of his small house, staring up at the night sky, tracing the constellations with his fingers and imagining what might be out there. His parents often called him a dreamer, and sometimes they worried that his head was too full of fantasies to ever make a normal life. But Arman didn't mind. He felt at home among the stars. He felt connected to them in a way he couldn't explain. Every twinkling light above him seemed to whisper secrets, and he was determined to listen. As he grew older, this fascination turned into something more serious. He began reading books on astrophysics, cosmology, and the science of space exploration. He was particularly drawn to the study of signals from space radio waves, electromagnetic pulses, and anything that could be interpreted as a message from beyond Earth. While most people saw space as a vast, empty void, Arman saw it as a library, full of messages waiting to be read. He spent countless nights with his homemade radio equipment, trying to detect patterns in the background noise of the universe. At first it was frustrating. Most of the time, he picked up only static, interference from satellites, and natural cosmic phenomena that repeated in dull, predictable cycles. Despite the failures, Arman never gave up. He knew that a single breakthrough could change everything. He believed in the possibility that intelligent life existed somewhere out there, and he wanted to be the first human to find it. Most of his colleagues laughed at him. They said he was wasting his time, that the chances of receiving an intelligent signal were slim to none. Universities and research institutions dismissed his theories, calling them fanciful and unrealistic. But Arman had something that they didn't: patience. He was willing to dedicate years of his life to a task that might never succeed, because the possibility that he could be right was worth the risk. Arman eventually managed to get a small observatory of his own, funded partially by a private grant and partially from his own savings. The observatory was modest, nothing like the large government or space agency facilities. It was located in a remote desert area, far from the lights and noises of cities. The isolation suited him perfectly. Here, he could work without distractions, focus entirely on listening to the universe, and follow every signal wherever it led. His observatory was filled with antennas, satellites, computers, and recording devices. The walls were plastered with charts of stars, graphs of signals, and notes filled with theories and calculations. It was messy, chaotic even, but it was alive with his passion and obsession. For years, Arman spent countless nights at the observatory, scanning the skies. Some nights were quiet, with only the soft hum of machinery and the whispering wind outside. Other nights were thrilling, filled with strange patterns and signals that seemed almost alive. He carefully recorded everything, meticulously analyzing each anomaly. Most of the signals turned out to be natural phenomena, pulsars, solar flares, and cosmic background radiation. But occasionally, he would detect patterns that didn't make sense. These signals were irregular, repeating in ways that suggested purpose. They had a structure, a rhythm, and a complexity that hinted at intelligence behind them. Every time this happened, Arman's heart would race. One evening, while reviewing months of recorded data, he noticed a sequence that was different from anything he had ever seen. It repeated at precise intervals and seemed to follow a pattern that could not be attributed to natural phenomena. It was unlike the random cosmic noise he was used to analyzing. At first, he thought it might be a mistake, a glitch in his equipment, a software error, but after checking and rechecking everything, he realized it was genuine. The signal was real, and it was coming from deep space. The excitement was overwhelming. He could hardly believe it. Could it be a message from an intelligent civilization? He spent hours decoding it, analyzing its structure, and running simulations. It was complex, almost like a language, but he could detect recurring motifs that hinted at meaning. Arman became obsessed with this signal. It consumed his thoughts, his dreams, and every waking moment. He began working day and night, ignoring meals, sleep, and even human contact. His friends and family became worried. They tried to convince him to rest, to step back, to take a break. But Arman could not. Every time he looked at the signal on his screen, he felt a connection, as if something was reaching out to him personally. He believed that if he could only decode it completely, he could answer back, establish contact, and perhaps communicate with beings from another world. After weeks of careful analysis, he noticed something extraordinary. Embedded within the signal was a repeating code that resembled a distress signal. It was subtle, almost hidden, but unmistakable to him. It was as if someone or something was calling for help, reaching out across the vast distances of space, hoping that someone would hear. The thought filled him with a mix of wonder, fear, and responsibility. If this really was a civilization in trouble, he could be the first human to offer aid. He imagined the headlines: "Humanity makes first contact with extraterrestrial life." But alongside the excitement was a deeper, more serious thought. What if responding was dangerous? What if he didn't understand the full consequences? Arman wrestled with the decision for days. The rational part of his mind warned him to be cautious, to consult with other scientists or governments before acting. But his intuition, his belief in the rightness of helping, pushed him forward. He convinced himself that reaching out was the only ethical choice. After all, if he ignored the signal, If humanity stayed silent, who would answer if a civilization was truly in distress? The moral imperative was clear to him. He prepared a carefully crafted message, simple and unambiguous, a message of peace, a declaration of Earth's presence, and an offer to help. Sending the message was a tense, almost ceremonial act. Armin double-checked the equipment, reviewed the code, and made sure the transmission was stable. He broadcast the message into the void, directly toward the source of the distress signal. For a few minutes he simply stared at the screens, holding his breath, hoping, fearing, imagining the response he might receive. It was a moment of pure human courage and curiosity, an act that carried the weight of an entire species. First real interaction with the unknown. Little did Armin know that this single decision, made with good intentions, would change everything. What he believed was a plea for help was not exactly that. The beings on the other end were not helpless, peaceful creatures. They were intelligent, yes, but also powerful, territorial, and extremely dangerous. They had a reputation across the galaxy for attacking civilizations they considered a threat. In their own perspective, any signal revealing the location of another species was a challenge, a provocation, and an opportunity to strike first. By sending Earth's coordinates, Armin had unknowingly drawn the attention of one of the most dangerous species alive. At that moment, sitting alone in his observatory, Armin had no idea that the universe he had admired for so long was about to become a battlefield. He could not see the fleets moving, the eyes of the alien species turning toward Earth, the calculations being made in distant star systems. To him, it was still a quiet night under the stars, but everything had already changed. The first domino had fallen, and there was no turning back. In that single act of curiosity, hope, and humanity, he had triggered events that would soon escalate beyond his imagination. As the night deepened, Armin looked up at the sky. The stars twinkled calm and indifferent. He did not yet know that some of those lights hid eyes that were now watching him, studying Earth, and deciding the fate of millions. The universe, vast and infinite, had suddenly become intensely personal. Armin felt a thrill mixed with dread, an awareness that the choices of one person could ripple across the cosmos. He understood, deep down, that his life and the life of every human being was about to intersect with forces beyond comprehension. And so, what began as the quiet passion of a boy who loved to stare at the stars had now grown into the first step in a story that no one on Earth could have imagined. Armin had listened, he had believed, and he had answered. But the universe, as it turns out, has a way of testing even the noblest intentions. His journey, which had started with hope and curiosity, was only beginning. The stars above, once symbols of wonder, now held the shadow of danger, and humanity's place in the galaxy had just been revealed. After Armin sent the first message into space, he felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. For the first few days there was no response, only silence. He tried to convince himself that patience was necessary. After all, the distances involved in space were immense, and any reply would take years, maybe even decades. Yet deep down he sensed that something had changed, something had shifted, and it was not just in the stars. He began noticing unusual readings on his instruments, strange patterns in the radio waves that he hadn't seen before. At first, he assumed it was interference, or perhaps an error in the equipment. But the patterns were too deliberate, too structured. It became clear that the universe was responding not with words, but with signals of its own. Meanwhile on Earth, strange things started happening. Military satellites began detecting unusual energy emissions near the moon and in orbit around the planet. Space agencies were baffled, their scientists and officers unable to explain the spikes. The readings didn't match anything in known physics, and the sudden precision and coordination suggested something or someone was deliberately manipulating energy. Panic quietly began to ripple through the intelligence community. Meetings were held in secure underground bunkers, attended by world leaders and top scientists. No one could agree on what was happening, but everyone agreed that it was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. Armin, still working at his small observatory, was oblivious to the global concern at first. He focused solely on the signals, analyzing them with a level of detail that no one else could match. But the anomalies became impossible to ignore. Objects, or what appeared to be objects, were detected moving at incredible speeds in near-Earth space, almost as if something were observing humanity, waiting for a moment to act. Armin realized with growing horror that the signal he had sent had attracted attention, but not the kind he had imagined. He had believed he was reaching out to a helpless civilization, one that might need guidance or aid. He had imagined a delicate exchange of ideas, a polite conversation across the stars. Instead, he had sent a beacon to a predator species, one that thrived on domination and destruction. The first official warnings came quietly at first. Messages from military intelligence asked Armin to report to secret facilities for consultation. At first, he resisted, believing that his work was purely scientific and that government involvement would complicate matters unnecessarily. But the persistence and insistence of high-ranking officers left him no choice. Reluctantly, he agreed to leave the observatory and travel to a secure location, one with multiple layers of protection, armed guards, and restricted communication. As he arrived, he was struck by the sheer scale of the operation. Teams of scientists, engineers, and military strategists worked tirelessly, their faces tense, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Armin, who had spent years alone in his observatory, suddenly found himself at the center of a planetary crisis. In the meetings that followed, Armin learned the truth. The species he had contacted was one of the most feared in the galaxy, notorious for destroying civilizations that dared to reveal their location. They were not helpless or in need of assistance. They were hunters, conquerors, and tacticians whose intellect and technology far surpassed anything humanity had ever imagined. Every detail Armin had known about them, the signals, the patterns, was a glimpse into their calculated, relentless strategy. The species viewed any new presence in their region of space as a threat, and they reacted with overwhelming force. His well-intentioned message, meant to establish peaceful contact, had instead marked Earth as a target. For Armin, the realization was crushing. He felt a deep sense of guilt and responsibility, knowing that his actions, however innocent, had put millions of lives in jeopardy. At the same time, he could not ignore the incredible danger of humanity now faced. This species was already moving toward Earth, or so the data suggested. Fleet-sized movements, detected through shifts in gravitational waves and energy fields, indicated that massive alien ships were traveling at speeds that defied current human understanding. Scientists and military officials debated whether these were exploratory ships, reconnaissance units, or actual warships preparing for an assault. The uncertainty fueled a rising sense of urgency. As the days passed, the threat became more visible. Massive energy spikes appeared in the upper atmosphere. Strange objects moved across orbital trajectories, and communications satellites began experiencing interference. The general public remained largely unaware at first, but within elite circles the fear was palpable. Governments activated emergency protocols, preparing for worst-case scenarios. Evacuation plans, planetary defense strategies, and emergency communications were drafted, tested, and revised. Humanity was mobilizing for a potential interstellar confrontation, something most people had only imagined in science fiction. Yet the trigger for this impending crisis was simple: Armin's message, sent out of curiosity and empathy, that announced humanity's presence to a species whose instincts were programmed for domination. Armin, now deeply involved in the response, faced his own inner struggles. He had always believed that science and discovery were noble pursuits, that curiosity was a guiding light. Now, he was confronted with the dark side of discovery, the unintended consequences of reaching out, of revealing knowledge before being prepared. His confidence, once unshakable, wavered. He questioned every decision he had ever made. Could he have anticipated this? Should he have waited? Could humanity survive what was coming? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him relentlessly, a constant reminder that one man's actions could indeed change the fate of the entire planet. The alien species, meanwhile, continued to send signals, though not in the way Armin had hoped. Their messages were aggressive, almost taunting, filled with energy patterns that indicated observation and analysis rather than communication. Earth's scientists struggled to decode the signals, attempting to understand the species' intentions and capabilities. Each discovery brought new revelations: advanced propulsion methods, energy weapons far beyond human capability, and tactical strategies that suggested centuries of experience in interstellar conflict. The more Armin studied the signals, the more he realized that humanity was dealing with an adversary whose intelligence and ruthlessness were unmatched. Tensions on Earth escalated as well. Leaders debated how to respond. Should humanity attempt communication, negotiate, or prepare for combat? Military forces around the world began coordinating for defensive action, though they had no clear plan and no effective weapons against an enemy whose technology was centuries ahead. Civilian populations remained largely unaware of the exact nature of the threat, but rumors, strange satellite anomalies, and unexplained events began to spread panic. Armin watched as fear spread, realizing that the consequences of his actions were no longer abstract, they were unfolding in real time. Amidst all this, Armin had to adjust to working in a highly structured, high-pressure environment that was completely different from the quiet, solitary observatory he had known. Meetings were long and intense, filled with analysis, projections, and debates about possible alien behavior. He was asked to interpret signals, predict movement, and advise on potential strategies, all under constant scrutiny. He found himself navigating a maze of political tension, scientific uncertainty, and moral dilemmas. Every suggestion he made was weighed carefully, knowing that a single miscalculation could cost lives. Despite the fear and pressure, Armin's determination did not falter. He threw himself into understanding the species' patterns, their logic, and their weaknesses. He revisited every signal, every transmission, looking for details he might have missed. Gradually, he began to see patterns, clues that hinted at behavior, strategy, and hierarchy within the alien civilization. These insights were small but crucial. They gave humanity a faint hope that the species could be predicted, perhaps even manipulated, if approached carefully. Armin realized that knowledge, even in tiny amounts, might be the key to survival. As the alien presence grew closer, Armin's situation became increasingly tense. The species was approaching Earth's vicinity with alarming speed, though they had not yet made direct contact. Each day brought new readings. Each night brought sleepless observation. Humanity's vulnerability was becoming painfully clear. Cities, populations, and infrastructure were entirely exposed to an enemy whose capabilities were far beyond human defense. Panic, mixed with a flicker of hope, the hope that the intelligence Armin had uncovered could provide a path to survival during this phase. Armin's role transformed from a quiet researcher to a critical advisor and strategist. He worked closely with military commanders, scientists, and communication specialists, translating the alien signals into actionable intelligence. Every insight mattered. Every decoded pattern could potentially save lives. And yet, the knowledge of his initial mistake that his message had triggered this chain of events remained a heavy burden. He carried it silently, a constant reminder of the fragile balance between curiosity and consequence. It became clear that humanity's survival was uncertain, and the line between victory and disaster was thin. The species that had now noticed Earth was not just powerful, it was calculated, relentless, and highly intelligent. Armin understood that no brute force would save humanity. Only understanding, strategy, and perhaps cunning could tip the balance. The once quiet observatory that had been a sanctuary for discovery now seemed a distant memory. Humanity was waking up to a reality where the universe was not merely a field of stars, but a battlefield, and where the actions of one individual had the potential to change the course of history forever. And so, the rising challenge became clear. Humanity had not just received a message, it had inadvertently declared its existence to a predator of immense power. Every human on the planet was now caught in the consequences of curiosity, and the race against an intelligent, aggressive, and merciless species had begun. Armin's life, and the lives of everyone on Earth, had irrevocably changed. The calm of the stars had vanished, replaced by a tension that stretched across the solar system, and the first steps of a planetary struggle were already unfolding. Unseen but unstoppable. As the days passed, the threat to Earth grew clearer, and humanity began to experience the consequences of Armin's initial contact with the alien species. What had started as strange readings and unexplained energy fluctuations soon became undeniable evidence that something massive, intelligent, and dangerous was approaching. Satellites and observatories around the world began detecting anomalies in orbit, objects moving in ways that defied known physics, and patterns of energy that suggested coordination. The quiet hope that Armin had once felt, hope that he was making a peaceful connection, was replaced by a sinking dread. Governments were forced to act, but their actions were often frantic and disorganized. Intelligence agencies, military commanders, and political leaders were suddenly thrown into uncharted territory. Briefings took place in secret rooms deep underground, where specialists discussed worst-case scenarios, attacks on major cities, destruction of satellites, potential disruption of communications, and even the possibility of mass casualties on a global scale. Military forces around the world mobilized for defense, but they were humanity's technology, advanced though it was on a human scale, seemed almost primitive when compared to the signs of the approaching species' capabilities. Ships were moving at speeds that would take conventional human spacecraft decades to achieve. Weapons of unimaginable energy potential were being detected. The reality was terrifying. The enemy was beyond human comprehension in power and strategy. Armin himself was now under immense pressure. No longer just a solitary scientist studying cosmic signals, he had become a central figure in humanity's defense planning. His knowledge of the initial signal, his understanding of the alien communication patterns, and his insights into their technology made him invaluable. Yet the burden was immense. He spent nearly every waking hour analyzing the incoming signals, trying to predict movements, and advising military strategists. The stress was relentless. He felt the weight of the entire world pressing on his shoulders. Every decision, every interpretation of the alien signals, could determine whether humanity survived or perished. The aliens, for their part, were not merely sending signals, they were actively observing. Armin and the teams of scientists around him began to understand that the bursts of energy, the movements in orbit, and the strange phenomena appearing in space were all tests. The species was analyzing humanity's behavior, trying to determine how intelligent, organized, and resourceful we were. It was as if the universe had suddenly become a vast chessboard, and humanity was a single, inexperienced player facing an opponent who had centuries, perhaps millennia, of experience. Every human action, every attempt to understand or respond to the signals, was being monitored and assessed. Tensions on Earth escalated rapidly. Panic began to seep into civilian life. Even as governments attempted to maintain calm, rumors spread about strange lights in the sky, mysterious energy waves that disrupted communication, and unidentified objects observed near major cities. Social media, television, and other forms of communication amplified fear. Some people dismissed the warnings as hoaxes or exaggerations, while others panicked at the very idea that Earth was under threat from an alien force. This mix of skepticism and fear created chaos. Communities struggled to make sense of what was happening. Emergency services faced unusual demands, and public trust in leadership wavered. Armand watched all of this unfold, aware that his actions had set these events into motion. Within the military and scientific teams, disagreements arose about how best to respond. Some advocated for immediate communication attempts, reasoning that dialogue could prevent war. Others pushed for preparing weapons, stockpiling resources, and fortifying cities, believing that negotiation would be impossible with such a ruthless species. The debates were heated, and Armand found himself in the middle, torn between his desire for peaceful contact and the harsh reality that humanity might soon face annihilation. He realized that conventional thinking was no longer sufficient. The strategies of the past, the approaches that had worked against human or terrestrial threats, would likely fail against this alien intelligence. Creativity, cunning, and deep analysis were the only tools left as the alien forces drew closer. Their presence became increasingly visible through subtle but undeniable signs. Satellites detected energy fluctuations in the upper atmosphere, massive gravitational anomalies, and sudden bursts of radiation that could not be explained by natural phenomena. Armand's team realized that these signals were not just for observation, they were demonstrations of power. The species wanted humanity to understand the consequences of missteps, to feel the overwhelming superiority of their technology. Every detection of these phenomena sent ripples of fear through the global scientific community, but also drove Armand to work harder. He knew that understanding the patterns could be the difference between survival and total destruction. Armand also began to notice strange anomalies in the signals that suggested the aliens were highly methodical. There were pauses, repetitions, and alterations that seemed to test human interpretation. The species appeared to be examining not only our technological capacity but also our intelligence, decision-making, and even morality. Every calculation, every attempt to respond, was being monitored for consistency, creativity, and effectiveness. Armand realized that this was not merely a threat of brute force, it was a psychological and strategic challenge. Humanity was being assessed, studied, and prepared for eventual confrontation. Within this context, Armand experienced both isolation and urgency. Unlike anyone else, he understood the significance of the patterns. He saw the intelligence behind the chaos. He knew that every reading, every energy burst, and every orbital movement was deliberate. The aliens were not simply attacking, they were teaching, testing, and probing. Yet the global response remained reactive rather than proactive. Leaders wanted quick answers, weapons, and immediate plans. Scientists wanted time for careful study, analysis, and controlled experiments. Armand had to bridge the gap, translating the alien behavior into understandable strategies, all while managing the human tendency toward panic and indecision. During this time, Armand began to experience physical and emotional strain. Sleepless nights, endless calculations, and constant exposure to stress left him exhausted. Yet his resolve did not waver. He felt a deep moral responsibility. He had initiated this crisis, and it was now his duty to help humanity navigate it. While others panicked, Armand focused on the data. He noticed small but critical patterns in the alien movements, subtle tendencies in their behavior, repeated strategies, and predictable responses. These patterns were faint, often buried beneath layers of complex signals, but to Armand, they represented hope. If humanity could understand these tendencies, perhaps it could find a way to survive at the same time. Humanity was scrambling to prepare defenses, though they were rudimentary compared to what the alien species could deploy. Satellites were reinforced, space-based detection systems upgraded, and emergency response plans refined. Yet the disparity in capability was staggering. The alien species operated with technology that could manipulate energy, matter, and gravity in ways that humans could not comprehend. Conventional weapons were almost meaningless in this context. The realization of vulnerability, combined with the fear of annihilation, created a pressure cooker atmosphere. Every decision felt critical, every misstep potentially fatal. Armand also had to contend with political tensions. Different nations wanted to act in their own interests, fearing that the alien species might target them first or punish perceived weaknesses. Cooperation was essential, but difficult. Scientific knowledge, defense strategies, and intelligence data had to be shared. Yet national pride, fear, and mistrust created obstacles. Armand found himself constantly mediating, translating scientific findings into actionable advice for leaders, and trying to foster cooperation where suspicion threatened to fracture global unity. His role became as much about diplomacy and coordination as about science and signal analysis. Meanwhile, the alien presence was growing more aggressive in subtle ways. Minor attacks occurred in orbital space, targeting satellites and other uncrewed systems. Energy discharges disrupted communication networks, creating confusion and misdirection. These acts were calculated, designed to measure humanity's response and adaptability. Each time, Armand and the teams observed patterns that revealed the alien species' level of intelligence, strategic thinking, and patience. Humanity was learning, slowly, about the nature of its opponent. But every lesson came with high stakes. Amid this chaos, Armin had moments of reflection. He thought about the irony of his situation. The pursuit of knowledge, the desire to connect with the unknown, had placed the entire world at risk. Yet he also realized that fear and panic could not guide him. He had to think clearly, creatively, and strategically. Every calculation mattered. Every insight could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The challenge was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, pressing, and deadly. Humanity was in the midst of a struggle that tested not just its technology, but its intelligence, resilience, and unity. Through it all, Armin remained committed to decoding the signals, understanding the alien motives, and preparing humanity for what was to come. He began to see the enemy not just as a threat, but as a puzzle. Each energy burst, each movement, and each pattern was a piece of a complex design that could be studied, analyzed, and potentially exploited. His hope was that understanding the patterns might reveal weaknesses, tendencies, or rivalries within the alien species that humanity could use. The task was immense, but Armin felt that insight, intelligence, and careful observation could give humanity a fighting chance. Humanity was awake to the threat. Global efforts were underway, and Armin had become a central figure in the defense. The alien species, intelligent, methodical, and overwhelmingly powerful, was closing in, assessing humanity, and preparing to act. What had begun as curiosity, a desire to reach out and make contact, had transformed into a deep struggle for survival. Every human on Earth was now involved, directly or indirectly, in a challenge of unprecedented scale. Humanity faced a species capable of destroying entire civilizations, but it also had Armin, whose knowledge, insight, and perseverance might tip the balance. The coming days would test every skill, every intuition, and every ounce of courage. Humanity was no longer merely observing the stars. It was being observed, and the stakes could not have been higher. The tension on Earth reached a breaking point as the alien species approached closer. Humanity, for the first time, truly grasped the scale of the threat. Cities, satellites, communication networks, even the planet's own atmosphere were exposed to forces far beyond human technology. Panic and fear had begun to grip nations and citizens alike. Yet amid the chaos, Armin felt a strange clarity. He understood something that few others did. The key to survival lay not in brute force, but in understanding the enemy's mind. The patterns in the signals, the careful and deliberate behavior of the species, hinted at rivalries, hierarchies, and divisions that could be exploited. If humanity acted cleverly, there might be a way to survive. But it would require audacity, intelligence, and perfect timing. Armin spent countless hours reviewing all the signals the species had sent. He analyzed their movements, their energy bursts, their orbital patterns, and the subtle variations in their transmissions. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The alien fleet was not a single unified force. It was composed of multiple factions, each led by a powerful warlord. These warlords were highly intelligent, territorial, and ruthless. They had united loosely only for convenience, but their alliances were fragile, built on mutual interest rather than loyalty. Every message, every maneuver, and every energy discharge contained subtle cues about their internal politics, signals that could be read, interpreted, and potentially exploited. This discovery gave Armin a glimmer of hope. Humanity was up against an overwhelmingly powerful opponent, yes, but one whose internal divisions could become its vulnerability. Armin realized that exploiting these divisions would require careful planning. He could not simply broadcast warnings or negotiate directly. The aliens would interpret that as weakness or a trap. Instead, he needed a way to provoke the factions against each other, using the alien communication system to sow distrust and conflict. It was a dangerous gamble. If he misinterpreted their patterns, the consequences could be catastrophic. The aliens were fast, powerful, and deadly. Any mistake could lead to the destruction of Earth before humanity even had a chance to react. Yet, despite the risks, Armin knew this was the only way to survive. Humanity could not compete with their technology or firepower directly. Only strategy, cunning, and manipulation could give them a fighting chance. He began working in secret with a small team of engineers, cryptographers, and military specialists who had the skill and trust to assist him. They needed to develop a counter-signal and an intricate message designed to exploit the rivalry between the alien warlords. It was not simple. The aliens communicated in a complex system of energy patterns, frequencies, and codes, and humans had to translate their understanding into something that would be recognized as genuine and provocative. Weeks of experimentation, simulation, and trial and error followed. The team worked day and night, often skipping sleep, as they built a message capable of triggering internal conflict without alerting the aliens to human presence as a threat. Armin understood the psychological nature of the alien factions. Each warlord was proud, calculating, and intensely protective of its own interests. That counter-signal had to play on these traits, suggesting betrayal, deception, or competition. It was like composing a symphony of deception. One wrong note, one misaligned pulse, and the signal could backfire. Yet Armin's familiarity with the original transmissions gave him an edge. He knew how the species encoded subtle meaning, how patterns implied intention, and how energy bursts carried emotion and authority. Using this knowledge, he crafted a message designed to appear authentic, urgent, and credible to the alien leaders. Meanwhile, tension on Earth intensified. Nations were mobilizing defenses, preparing evacuation plans, and fortifying strategic locations. Panic continued to grow among civilians, fueled by glimpses of strange energy phenomena and unexplained satellite anomalies. Despite this, Armon and his small team remained focused. They worked in a highly secured facility, isolated from the broader panic, translating the alien language of energy and intent into something humanity could manipulate. The pressure was immense. One misstep, one miscalculation, could doom not only the team, but the entire planet. Yet there was no alternative. Humanity's survival depended on success. As the final version of the countersignal was prepared, Armon and his team conducted repeated simulations. They projected the potential responses of the alien factions, analyzed all possible outcomes, and tested the message for any flaws. Every detail mattered: the timing of the transmission, the sequence of energy pulses, the frequency shifts, and the coding of false intentions. It was a delicate balance of psychology, technology, and strategy. Even with every precaution, there was no guarantee it would work. Yet, despite the risks, hope burned brightly. Humanity had no other option. When the day arrived to transmit the message, Armon felt a mix of fear, anticipation, and determination. The countersignal was sent, broadcast into the depths of space toward the alien fleets. For a few moments, the team held their breath. Then, they waited, watching the readings, analyzing every subtle response. The first signs were subtle shifts in energy patterns, minor deviations in orbital movements, but gradually, the effects became more pronounced. The alien factions began reacting not toward Earth but toward each other. Signals suggested suspicion, accusation, and preparation for conflict. The warlords were interpreting the message exactly as Armon had hoped. They believed they had been betrayed by rival factions, and their attention shifted inward. The results were immediate and dramatic. The alien fleets, once coordinated and unified, began maneuvers that suggested preparation for internal conflict. Energy discharges were now targeted at each other, not Earth. The species, previously focused on assessing humanity, now turned against its own. It was as if the predator had been tricked into hunting itself. Armon watched a mixture of relief and awe filling him as centuries of alien experience and strength were undermined by human ingenuity. The countersignal had worked. Humanity had not defeated the alien species through weapons or force, but through strategy, understanding, and daring manipulation. Even as the alien factions began fighting among themselves, the threat was not over. Armon knew that the species was highly intelligent and could recover from mistakes. They might realize the deception, unite again, or escalate further. There was no time for celebration. Humanity had won a tactical advantage, but the larger strategic battle was still ahead. Armon continued to monitor signals, analyzing every movement and every burst of energy, ready to adjust strategies if necessary. The work was relentless, but the hope it inspired was unlike anything seen in humanity before. During this time, Armon also reflected on the moral implications of his actions. He had not only initiated contact, but now he had manipulated a species into fighting itself. The ethical weight of these decisions was heavy. Could humanity justify using deception in such a manner even for survival? Could any species be judged by the same standards? Despite these questions, Armon understood that morality had to coexist with survival. In the face of extinction, strategic action was necessary, even if it was ethically complicated. The fate of billions depended on ingenuity and decisiveness, not simple moral absolutes. As the alien factions continued their internal conflict, humanity seized the opportunity to strengthen defenses. Satellites were repositioned, space-based monitoring systems enhanced, and strategic coordination between nations improved. Humanity learned quickly, adapting to the new reality that intelligence, observation, and flexibility were essential to survival. Armon became a central figure in this coordination, his understanding of the alien logic now indispensable. The countersignal had bought Earth time, and with time came preparation, learning, and hope. Armon's personal journey in this phase was equally intense. The pressure of responsibility, the moral weight of deception, and the physical and emotional strain of constant work were immense. Yet he found a sense of purpose and clarity. For the first time, humanity had a fighting chance not through direct confrontation, but through insight, observation, and cleverness. Armon had transformed from a solitary researcher into a strategist whose decisions affected the survival of the entire species. Every moment of doubt, every sleepless night, and every analysis of alien behavior had led to this crucial turning point. The alien species, feared for its power and ruthlessness, was now embroiled in internal conflict, distracted from its plans against Earth. The countersignal had worked, demonstrating the power of intelligence, strategy, and careful observation. Yet the danger remained real, immediate, and deadly. Humanity had bought time, not victory. The next steps would require continued ingenuity, careful planning, and courage. The battle had shifted, but it was far from over. Through all of this, Armin understood the fragile balance between curiosity, knowledge, and survival. The very actions that had put humanity in danger, his decision to send the first message, had also created the possibility for salvation. The universe, vast and indifferent, had revealed itself as both a threat and a puzzle. Armin now knew that survival depended not on strength, but on understanding, insight, and the ability to act decisively when the stakes were highest. Humanity's journey had moved from passive observation to active engagement, and the path forward required courage, intellect, and resilience. The critical turning point demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming power, strategy, cunning, and understanding could create opportunities. Humanity had survived the first steps of an interstellar challenge through ingenuity and daring. Yet Armin knew that the coming battles would test every skill, every intuition, and every ounce of human ingenuity. The aliens had been provoked, their internal conflicts revealed, but their capacity for destruction remained vast. The stage was set for the next phase, where Earth's survival would depend not just on cleverness but on unity, courage, and decisive action. The moment the countersignal worked, humanity had a glimmer of hope, but Armin knew the battle was far from over. The alien species, once coordinated and focused on Earth, had now turned on each other. Their fleets, previously unified in movement and strategy, were engaged in conflict, attacking one another with devastating energy discharges and powerful maneuvers. From orbit, massive explosions lit up the void, illuminating the scale of their destructive capabilities. The entire ships disintegrated in brilliant flashes, and arcs of energy carved through space as rival factions attempted to assert dominance. Humanity, for the first time, observed the power of a species that could destroy entire planets, and they saw it directed at itself. The aliens had become their own worst enemy, and Earth had a chance to survive. The human military and scientific teams worked quickly to seize the opportunity. Earth had spent years building satellites, monitoring systems, and defenses that were inadequate against a single alien fleet. But they now had a window where they could use their limited technology to strategic advantage. Armin advised them to remain calm, to focus on observation, and to avoid actions that could alert the aliens to Earth's presence as a threat. The moment had to be used wisely. Any mistake, any act of aggression toward the alien species, could unify the factions again, and humanity would be in immediate peril. The world coordinated its response with unprecedented unity. National rivalries and political differences were temporarily set aside, replaced by a shared focus on survival. Armin, exhausted but focused, remained at the heart of the operation. He continued analyzing the alien signals, looking for ways to maintain and manipulate the internal conflict between the factions. He observed patterns in their movements and noticed that some warlords were more aggressive, more strategic, and more likely to exploit perceived weaknesses in their rivals. Others were more cautious, reacting slowly to perceived betrayals. Using these insights, Armin crafted small, precise transmissions that subtly influenced the factions' perceptions of each other. These transmissions were delicate. Any misstep could unify the aliens instead of dividing them, but they worked, escalating tensions and ensuring that the internal conflict intensified rather than subsiding as the alien factions fought. Earth began to understand their vulnerabilities. Despite their immense power, their coordination was fragile, and their internal rivalries could be exploited. Human satellites observed key tactical errors made by the alien warlords, such as exposing critical energy sources, miscalculating trajectories, or underestimating the range of their rivals' weapons. Scientists and engineers on Earth analyzed these weaknesses, preparing defensive systems and countermeasures that would have been useless under normal circumstances but could now provide a real advantage. Humanity learned to strike intelligently, using observation and understanding to compensate for technological inferiority. During this period, humanity also experienced moments of fear and uncertainty. The alien ships, even while fighting each other, still possessed the capability to attack Earth at any time. The planet's population remained largely unaware of the scale of the danger, but for those who knew, every day was tense. Blackouts, satellite disruptions, and strange energy phenomena reminded humans that the threat had not disappeared. Armin, acutely aware of the stakes, continued to work tirelessly, guiding operations, interpreting signals, and advising decisions. His understanding of alien behavior became the most valuable resource in the world, and every insight he provided had the potential to save millions of lives. The conflict among the alien warlords intensified. Massive debris fields formed in space. Entire fleets were shattered, drifting in the void as reminders of the destructive power being wielded. Humanity watched from afar, a mixture of awe and fear filling scientists, military officers, and observers alike. The sheer scale of energy and technology involved was unlike anything ever imagined. The alien species had demonstrated what it meant to be truly dominant, capable of annihilating entire civilizations, yet their internal divisions had made them vulnerable. It was a lesson that humans would never forget. Intelligence and strength were powerful, but arrogance and division could be deadly. Armand also realized that the window of opportunity would not last forever. The aliens could eventually notice Earth's strategic advantage, unify against it, or simply escape to regroup and return stronger. Humanity had to prepare for any eventuality. While observing the alien conflict, Earth's forces quietly reinforced their orbital defenses, adjusted satellite positions, and began constructing emergency systems to mitigate potential attacks. Armand coordinated these efforts, ensuring that all measures were synchronized with the ongoing events in alien space. The balance was delicate, but it was necessary. Survival depended on precision, timing, and a deep understanding of the enemy's psychology. Meanwhile, the counter-signal's psychological effects on the alien species became increasingly evident. The warlords grew suspicious of each other, constantly testing alliances, redirecting energy, and striking at perceived threats. They misinterpreted signals, assumed betrayals, and overreacted to minor actions. What Armand had orchestrated was no longer a simple manipulation, had become a full-blown diversion. Drawing their focus away from Earth entirely, humanity had managed, for the first time, to turn the greatest danger it had ever faced into a temporary advantage. It was not victory, but it was a lifeline. Armand's personal journey during this phase was intense and exhausting. The pressure of responsibility, the knowledge that millions depended on his analysis, and the moral weight of manipulating an intelligent species kept him awake night after night. He reflected on the irony. The very actions that had put Earth in danger, his first message, had now enabled its survival. The balance of life and death rested on his understanding of patterns, behavior, and psychology. He knew that his decisions could have catastrophic consequences if he miscalculated, but he also knew that humanity's only chance lay in ingenuity, careful observation, and courage. As the alien factions continued fighting, humanity slowly gained confidence. The knowledge gained from observing their conflicts allowed Earth's forces to anticipate movements, reinforce defenses, and prepare for potential threats. The planet's survival was still uncertain, but hope began to replace the fear that had dominated earlier days. Scientists, engineers, and military personnel worked with renewed determination, understanding that the opportunity to learn and adapt was invaluable. For the first time, humanity felt that it had agency in a situation that had seemed hopeless. The conflict in space eventually reached a critical point. Some alien warlords suffered devastating losses, their fleets reduced to fragments, their energy supplies depleted, and their strategic positions compromised. Others attempted to regroup, but the mistrust and internal chaos made coordination nearly impossible. Armand, observing the patterns, advised humanity to maintain caution while continuing to exploit the divisions. The strategy was working. What had initially seemed like a hopeless confrontation had now shifted. Humanity had created a situation in which the alien species was preoccupied with itself, giving Earth the breathing room necessary to survive and plan for future defense. Through all of this, Armand remained deeply aware of the moral and ethical complexities. He had used deception, manipulation, and psychological insight to influence the behavior of a species that could destroy humanity. The weight of these choices was enormous. Could such actions be justified, even in the face of survival? Could the survival of billions excuse manipulation on a cosmic scale? Armand grappled with these questions, knowing that the answers were uncertain, but understanding that in moments of existential threat, survival often required decisions that were morally ambiguous. As the days passed, the human teams continued to monitor the alien conflict. The debris fields grew larger, energy discharges continued to illuminate space, and factions weakened further through internal attacks. Humanity's understanding of the species deepened, allowing for predictive analysis and better preparation. Every observation, every decoded signal, and every strategic adjustment contributed to a growing sense of control. Armand, exhausted but resolute, guided these efforts with precision, his experience and insight proving indispensable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the alien fleets began to break apart entirely. Some ships fled into deep space, seeking to regroup or avoid further conflict. Others were destroyed, leaving behind nothing but debris and echoes of energy. The warlords' internal conflict had reached a point where coordination was impossible, and their attention was no longer directed at Earth. Humanity had survived. The planet had faced annihilation, yet clever strategy, observation, and daring manipulation had bought the species the most precious resource of all time. In the aftermath, Earth's leaders and scientific teams slowly began to assess the scale of what had occurred. The survival of humanity was due not to firepower or direct confrontation, but to intelligence, analysis, and courage. The alien species, once feared as unstoppable, had been divided and weakened through insight and strategic action. Armand, the solitary researcher who had initiated contact years earlier, had become the central figure in a survival story that spanned the entire planet. His work, understanding decisions, had shifted the outcome from almost certain destruction to a hard-earned chance at continued existence. The experience demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming power, strategy, careful planning, and understanding could create opportunities. Armand reflected on the journey, from a young boy fascinated by stars to a scientist facing a threat that could have ended all life on Earth. His life had been defined by curiosity, courage, and the willingness to act decisively when the stakes were highest. Humanity was no longer hidden, no longer safe from observation by other civilizations. The survival of the species had depended on insight, cunning, and audacity. Armin understood that vigilance, preparedness, and strategic thinking would remain essential. The alien species might return, other civilizations might notice Earth, and the universe remained vast, full of dangers and opportunities. Yet humanity had survived this first encounter, not through might alone, but through understanding, adaptability, and the daring actions of those willing to take responsibility. After the alien fleets had fractured, and the immediate threat to Earth had passed, humanity was left to grapple with the consequences of what had occurred. The relief that spread through military command centers, scientific facilities, and governments around the world was immense, yet it was tempered by the sobering reality that the universe was still vast, dangerous, and full of unknowns. Earth had survived, yes, but barely. Entire populations had remained unaware of the danger, living their daily lives while their world had been seconds away from annihilation. For those who had been directly involved in the defense, the experience left deep marks physically, mentally, and emotionally. Among them, Armin carried the heaviest burden, for he knew that the crisis had begun because of his curiosity, his first message into the void, and his willingness to make contact. In the days following the conflict, Earth began a slow process of reflection and recovery. Governments convened high-level meetings to assess what had happened, and scientists worked tirelessly to analyze the alien signals that had been collected. Every detail, every burst of energy, every maneuver of the alien factions was scrutinized. Humanity had been given an unprecedented opportunity to learn about a species far more advanced, a species capable of destroying entire planets, and yet it had survived. The knowledge gained was invaluable. It was a lesson in observation, analysis, strategy, and the dangers inherent in curiosity. Humanity had glimpsed the universe's harsh realities in a way that no other civilization had experienced before. Armin, meanwhile, became a global figure. Once a quiet researcher, focused only on discovery and understanding, he now found himself at the center of international attention. Leaders, scientists, and the public sought his insight into the nature of the alien species, the signals, and the strategies that had saved humanity. He was asked to give briefings, consult on planetary defense protocols, and advise on interstellar communication ethics. Yet, despite his growing fame, Armin felt no pride. The victory had been fragile, and the survival of billions had depended on a combination of ingenuity, timing, and luck. The memory of the near catastrophe weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the consequences of actions taken without full understanding. In this aftermath, humanity also began to confront its own vulnerabilities. The alien species had revealed that Earth's technology, society, and defenses were fragile, particularly in the face of intelligence far beyond human capability. Governments began to invest more heavily in space monitoring, advanced propulsion systems, and defensive technologies that might one day allow humans to engage intelligently with other civilizations. The realization was humbling. Humanity had survived not because of might or power, but because of strategy, observation, and cleverness. It was a turning point, one that shifted human thinking from confidence born of isolation to caution tempered by experience. For Armin, the reflection was deeply personal. He spent long nights considering the lessons learned, the mistakes made, and the successes achieved. He understood that curiosity, while a driving force of discovery, carried responsibilities and risks. His initial message, sent with good intentions, had nearly brought about planetary destruction. Yet the very same curiosity, combined with insight and determination, had also been the key to survival. He realized that knowledge was a double-edged sword. It could bring enlightenment and opportunity, but it could also attract danger and create chaos. Humanity had survived by balancing intellect with action, observation with interpretation, and courage with caution. One of the most profound reflections for Armin was the understanding of communication and understanding across species. The alien factions had been intelligent, strategic, and ruthless, yet their behavior could be analyzed, predicted, and influenced. Humanity had succeeded not through violence, but by understanding patterns, psychology, and relationships. This lesson was invaluable. Intelligence and observation could create advantages even when facing overwhelming power. Armin documented every signal, every insight, and every lesson learned, ensuring that future generations could benefit from the knowledge gained. The human race, he realized, had survived its first encounter with an extraterrestrial species, but the universe was vast, and more encounters were inevitable. Meanwhile, humanity began to rebuild trust and cooperation on a global scale. The crisis had required unprecedented coordination among nations, forcing governments, scientists, and military forces to collaborate in ways that were previously impossible, while political rivalries and national interests had not disappeared. There was a newfound awareness of shared vulnerability and the need for global unity. Armin played a crucial role in fostering this cooperation, sharing insights, and encouraging collaboration among scientists and strategists worldwide. The near destruction of Earth had taught humanity that survival depended on working together, not acting in isolation. In the public sphere, rumors and fragmented information began to circulate. People noticed strange phenomena in the sky, unexplained satellite disruptions, and odd patterns in communication systems, while most did not know the full extent of the danger. There was a growing fascination with space, aliens, and the possibility of life beyond Earth. Armin recognized that humanity's curiosity would continue to drive exploration, even in the face of potential danger. The universe, vast and unpredictable, offered both opportunity and risk, and human beings had a choice: to remain ignorant and safe, or to seek understanding and risk peril. Humanity had now glimpsed the stakes. Armin also took time to reflect on morality and responsibility. The choices made during the crisis had not been simple. Deception, manipulation, and psychological strategies had been necessary to ensure survival. Armin understood that these actions were morally complex. The alien factions had been manipulated to fight among themselves. Yet the result had been humanity's survival. The experience reinforced a fundamental truth: when the survival of an entire species is at stake, ethical decisions become layered and complicated. Survival and morality must coexist, but they do not always align perfectly. Armin grappled with these ideas, recognizing the weight of responsibility that knowledge and power carried. As the world slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, humanity began to prepare for a future in which interstellar encounters could occur again. Space exploration, once a curiosity-driven endeavor, became a strategic priority. Defense systems, monitoring technologies, and observational capabilities were improved and expanded. Humanity had learned that the universe was not empty or passive. It was alive with intelligence, danger, and possibility. Armin worked to ensure that knowledge gained from the crisis would guide these efforts, teaching future generations the lessons of observation, strategy, and careful engagement with the unknown. The alien species, though temporarily distracted and weakened by internal conflict, remained a looming threat. Humanity had survived this encounter, but the universe still held dangers beyond comprehension. Armin understood that the peace achieved was fragile. The species could regroup, other intelligent civilizations might take notice of Earth, and humanity's vulnerability remained significant. The lessons learned were not only about survival, but about preparation, vigilance, and humility. Humans were not alone in the universe, and the first contact had proven that curiosity must be tempered with caution and strategy. Armin also considered the broader implications for humanity's future. Knowledge, observation, and intelligence were now more valuable than ever. The survival of the planet had depended on understanding the unknown, interpreting patterns, and taking decisive, informed action. It was not power alone that had saved humanity, but the ability to learn, adapt, and act strategically. Armin realized that these lessons were crucial for the future. The universe would present challenges that could not be solved by force alone, and intelligence, adaptability, and insight would determine humanity's place in the cosmos. Armin began to mentor a new generation of scientists, strategists, and observers, emphasizing the importance of curiosity paired with responsibility. He taught that observation, understanding, and strategic thinking could turn even the most overwhelming threat into an opportunity. Humanity's survival depended on learning from past mistakes and applying knowledge wisely. He encouraged young researchers to explore boldly, but always with awareness of potential consequences. The universe was vast and full of unknown civilizations, and preparation, intelligence, and caution would be humanity's greatest allies. The crisis also fostered a deep sense of global unity. Nations that had once been at odds now recognized the importance of collaboration. Scientific communities shared knowledge more freely. Military forces coordinated across borders, and international organizations began preparing for scenarios that had previously seemed like science fiction. Humanity's perspective on its place in the universe shifted. Earth was not isolated or safe by default. It was a small, vulnerable planet surrounded by unknown powers. Yet the crisis had demonstrated that even the most fragile civilization could survive if it acted with intelligence, strategy, and courage. Armin often reflected on the personal cost of the events. The stress, sleepless nights, and moral weight of his decisions had left deep impressions. Yet he also recognized the profound significance of what had been accomplished. Humanity had survived an encounter with a species capable of annihilation. Knowledge, strategy, and insight had outweighed brute force. Curiosity, once a potential danger, had become humanity's greatest asset, provided it was paired with responsibility and intelligence. Armin understood that the universe was no longer a distant backdrop. It was a realm of active, intelligent, and often dangerous forces, and humans had to navigate it wisely. As time passed, Earth began to rebuild and prepare for the long term. Monitoring systems were strengthened, planetary defense protocols were implemented, and research into interstellar communication and advanced technologies expanded. Humanity had learned that vigilance, preparation, and intelligence were essential for survival. Armin continued to play a key role in guiding these efforts. ensuring that the lessons learned from the alien encounter were preserved and applied. The story of survival, near destruction, and triumph became a cornerstone of human knowledge and strategy. Finally, Armin reflected on the broader philosophical lessons. Humanity had faced annihilation, yet it had survived not because of power alone, but because of understanding, strategy, and adaptability. The universe was vast, unpredictable, and filled with intelligent forces. But it was also a realm where observation, insight, and ingenuity could create opportunities. Humanity had learned to navigate danger, exploit knowledge, and act decisively when the stakes were highest. The experience reshaped not only strategy and science but also the way humans understood their place in the cosmos. In the end, the aftermath of the crisis was a time of cautious optimism, profound reflection, and preparation. Humanity had survived the most dangerous encounter imaginable. Armin had guided the survival effort with intelligence, courage, and insight, and his work had ensured that billions lived to see another day. Yet, the lessons were clear. Curiosity must be paired with responsibility. Knowledge must be coupled with caution, and survival depends on understanding, strategy, and the ability to act decisively. Humanity had survived its first war with an alien species, but the universe was vast, full of danger and opportunity, and the future would demand vigilance, courage, and wisdom at every step.